Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson, and I'm so thrilled that many of you are beginning to join for today's broadcast. It may take a few moments for all of you to get into the waiting room or into the webinar room, so I'm just going to take a few moments to give you some feedback about this new Zoom platform that we're using for our webinars. We do have a chat panel available, and you can speak with us and others at any time. So if you want to take a quick moment, you can find the chat panel and say hello. You'll notice that in the chat panel, I have let you know that we are live tweeting today using the hashtag Powerful Conversations. We believe that we are going to have a powerful conversation today, and we are so thrilled that you have joined us. So I'm here today with Julie Winkle Giulioni, Jackie Stavros, and Cheri Torres. Hello, ladies.
Hi.
Oh, hello.
Very nice to be here.
It is so nice to have you, and it seems like we have folks beginning to join. I want to also have everyone take a moment to find the Q&A panel, because at the end of today's broadcast, we're going to have all three of our expert presenters back with us for some live Q&A. So if you could find the question panel, I will often ask you to share where you're calling in from, and hi to Keith in Albany, New York. But I want to make sure that everyone can find that Q&A panel for later. So if you can take a quick moment and use it. Hi to Mary in Philadelphia. Looks like we have some conversation both in the chat and in the question panel. And you can feel free to put your questions in the question panel throughout the broadcast, and then we'll be addressing some questions together at the very end of today's event. So it looks like we have some folks in Toronto and in Irvine, California, and Louisiana and Calgary, New Hampshire, and Tampa. And this is going to be a really fun and powerful day. So thank you so much to all who are joining. And we look forward to learning together. A couple of more things you might like to know is that we are recording today's event, and we will be sharing this recording with you later so that you might share it with any colleagues who could benefit from it. So before we introduce our three expert presenters, I want to take a quick moment to find out a little bit about our attendees today, and we have a poll to share with you. So if you could take a moment to answer this poll, we would love to know more about you. So please tell us about your role in your organization, and you can choose more than one reply. Are you an HR professional? Are you a learning and development professional? Are you an independent consultant? Perhaps a line manager or an executive, or maybe you're here today because you are interested in powerful conversations. I'm going to give you a few moments to vote, and we do still have some folks joining us. So we'll give you a few more moments. It looks like at least half of you are interested in powerful conversations, which is exciting because that's what we're going to talk about today, and really split as it relates to other answers. And I'll show you those results in just a few moments. I'm going to give a few more of you a chance to answer. So while we're waiting, Julie, maybe you can tell where you are. We heard from people across the country. I know where you are, but maybe you can share with our folks where you are.
I am calling in from Southern California. I live in South Pasadena, just outside of Los Angeles.
And Jackie, I also know where you are. Would you like to share?
Yes, I'm from Brighton, Michigan, right about here, maybe 45 minutes north of where you are.
That is true. And Cheri, I know where you are, but maybe you can share with our attendees.
Sure, I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, in the midst of the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Smoky Mountains.
Thank you so much, ladies. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results with everyone. It looks like 14% of you on today's call are HR professionals. About 7% of you are learning and development professionals. 19% of you are independent consultants. 17% are line managers, and 24% of you are executives. About 53% of you are interested in powerful conversations. So I hope that today we'll be able to share some very valuable content that will assist you no matter where you work and live. I'm also curious, these ladies were all in our booth at the ATD event last month in San Diego. If you happen to meet us at the ATD event, why don't you go ahead and give a shout also in the chat. We would love to hear that we met you. So before we dive into today's conversation, I want to formally introduce each of these ladies and give you a little bit of insight into how our event today will run. So we're going to have a few moments of conversation with Jackie and Cheri, and they're going to share with us some concepts from their latest book, Conversations Worth Having. Then they're going to disappear temporarily, and Julie and I are going to talk about career conversations from her book, Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. And then, as I mentioned before, we're all going to get back together for some questions and answers that you can be typing throughout today's event in that Q&A panel. So before we dive in, I'd love to share with you about my friend and client, Jackie Stavros. Jackie teaches at the College of Management at Lawrence Tech University, and she has co-authored dozens of books, chapters, and articles, including the latest one that I showed you a moment ago, Conversations Worth Having. Her co-author on Conversations Worth Having is Cheri Torres. And Cheri is a senior consultant with Next Move and a partner at Innovation Partners International. Julie Winkle Giulioni has spent the past 25 years working with organizations worldwide to improve performance through leadership and learning. Julie has been named one of Inc. magazine's top 100 leadership speakers. I'm so thrilled to have the chance to speak with the three of you today, and I know that our attendees are going to learn so much from you. So Julie, we will be back with you soon.
Bye, Julie.
So Jackie and Cheri, I just love the title of this book, Conversations Worth Having. Can you tell us why conversation is so important?
Okay, so I guess the obvious reason to me is that's how we connect. We're connecting right now in a conversation. It's how we get things done in most settings. And you ask, why is it important? Because it influences your well-being, our well-being. You know, think of a good to great conversation as very uplifting. And think of how your day goes when you start off with a really bad or poor conversation. And I bet most people had at least one conversation in their mind or with someone else before they got to the webinar today.
That's true. I'm beginning to think about some conversations that have gone well and others that haven't gone as well.
Let me just add to that also that if you think about it, everything we do arises out of conversation. It's either conversations we're having in our own head, in our own mind with ourselves, or conversations with other people. And so what we're talking about and how we're talking about is incredibly important.
Thank you, Cheri. So the subtitle of your book is Using Appreciative Inquiry to Fuel Productive and Meaningful Engagement. Now, it might be that we have some folks on the call who are not familiar with appreciative inquiry. So can you tell us a little bit, give us, an introduction to what appreciative inquiry is?
Sure. So Appreciative Inquiry was created by David Cooperrider in 1985, and it started simply as a way to ask questions, a qualitative research technique. And it just really morphed into finding the best in people, teams, situations, and the relevant world around them. And it's widely used to foster positive change. What I like about Appreciative Inquiry is that it values all voices into a conversation. And it looks for more of what you want, not what you don't want, or more of what you want to happen instead of what you don't want to happen. So the generativity moves into that direction.
Cheri, do you have anything to add?
Jackie did a great job of sharing what appreciative inquiry is.
So I know we want to get a little bit practical. Could the two of you give me some examples of using appreciative inquiry and really igniting conversations worth having?
Sure. I would love to briefly share a story it's in the book in great detail, and we weave it throughout the whole book. But it's the story of Elisha Patel, who is a senior administrator at a very large hospital. The hospital had been growing significantly over a 3-year period, which was great. And it put undue stress on all of the staff. And so patient satisfaction scores were falling. And Elisha was in charge of quality. And she was finding over the course of a year of patient satisfaction scores being low, that she was getting more and more frustrated, more and more demanding, asking her nurse managers, why haven't things changed? You know, why aren't they doing something? And they were equally frustrated with, there's nothing else we can do. We're short of staff, people don't show up. Anyway, she got trained in appreciative inquiry and realized in the moment that she had been part of the problem because of the way she was engaging in conversation with her nurse managers. It was all problem focused, and there was some blame going on as well. So when she came back from her training, she flipped those conversations completely. And this time when talking to them, she instead focused on the patients that were satisfied and inquired about what is it about our highly satisfied patients that makes them satisfied? What are the nurses doing with them? What's happening? And she watched the energy in the meeting come alive, and the nurses were very excited to go back and observe and start to capture that information. And within a very short period of time, the statistics on those quality scores reversed. And in 1 month, there were 2 floors that actually received 100% patient satisfaction. So you can turn things around really fast just by shifting what you pay attention to and what kind of questions you ask.
Would you by chance have any examples of the types of conversations she ignited, maybe some of the ways that she framed those more positive approaches?
Sure. One of the things that she did was, instead of focusing on following patient scores and trying to get nurses to do something to get the scores to come up, she focused on what really was important and the outcome they wanted. So she shifted her focus to patient satisfaction, to highly satisfied patients. And then they began to have conversations about who are the patients that are highly satisfied and why. And those triggered conversations on the units with other nurses and with patients that were very satisfied to find out, you know, what's happening? What are we doing right that's really helping? And then they could grow those things. And they also asked the patients, what else could we do to make you even more satisfied? And so those conversations turned into very generative, energizing, positive conversations, but they also had lots of solutions that they could implement. And when they implemented them across the units, it had a significant impact, moving them towards exactly what they wanted, which was patient satisfaction.
That's really, really powerful, Cheri. I think it's easy to get stuck in identifying problems, but when we can shift to focusing on what's working, it definitely changes things. Jackie, I know you have an example that you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, and probably some of the consultants might relate to this one, but imagine being the consultant. I was brought on site to a automotive plant in Midwest Michigan that we had to come up with a 3-year plan to close the plant down. 3 years strategy. So when I walked into the room, everybody knew they were going to be out of a job. It's just who's going now, who's going 2 years and 3 years. And when we talk about the flip in our book and the generative questions, I posed the situation, what if, this is the possibility, what if you came up with an idea, put it on the revitalization list? And they all balked, and there's no such thing, you're either open or you're shut, this or that. And I said, but what if we created a strategy and a plan to revitalize the plant, knowing in 2 to 3 years, we're all going to be out of a job if we can't revitalize this. And after some really tough conversations we had, but they were appreciative and inquiry based, they said, all right, let's come up with a plan. So we reframed the conversation into creating a revitalization list. And we looked at the strengths of the plant. We looked at the possibilities, the opportunities, the aspirations of the people who worked in the plant, the community, and the measurable results that we could come up with in 3 years to possibly keep the plant open. And it's 12 years later, and the plant is thriving. So we really did, through appreciative inquiry and generative questions, flip the situation around, and the plant never shut down. That's probably one of my favorite stories.
That's a really powerful story. So just by asking a more positive question in a very difficult time, the entire plant was saved.
Yeah, but we knew that if we couldn't reach the results, we would all be out of a job. Well, they would be out of a job. I guess I would be out of one too.
Wow. So I think that was there a personal story that we were also going to share, or are we saving that one for later?
I guess we could share it now. So as you write a book, we weren't sure how we wanted to end the book, and Cheri and I had many conversations, and we also have I call it a disclaimer right around the end of the book that even we have the ain't it awful moment, and we have to flip ourselves, Cheri and I, around. So the story we ended with, we actually edited it, we didn't write. My daughter wrote a story that we asked to use, so we did cite her. She was 13 at the time, and we had gotten news that my husband Paul had a stage 4 cancer. And having to drive home, and some of us had been there, some of us will go there, I had to tell my children what was going on with their father. And the first question that came out of my daughter's mouth at 13 was, "Is Dad going to die?" And in a split second, I reflected and thought, I want to tell her he's going to be okay. But I actually said, "Allie, we are all going to die." And then I began to flip the conversation and reframe it and say, let's talk about what's possible. Let's talk about how to create an environment for your father to thrive. And let's talk about some of the good times with Dad and what you're going to do when I go back to the hospital. So she did tell me at first the conversation stunk and that I should have told her Dad is going to be okay. But she got it, and it worked. And it worked so well that when he was back home and he was sick again, I had to get him back to the hospital. And Adam, her little brother at 10, said, "Allie, is Dad going to be okay?" And she said, "Adam, we're all going to die, and just be nice and start eating lasagna again." So even the 13 to the 10-year-old, when you think of these stories and generative conversations, it moves us in a direction that we all have to go for and train for. And it's 5 years in remission. He's doing fine now, but we didn't think that at the time.
So finding a way to have that difficult conversation, but turn it positive and create a real meaningful connection. That's amazing. Definitely a conversation that you'll remember forever.
Yes.
Can I add just one quick thing?
Yes, please.
You brought to mind when you said turning it into a positive conversation. And very often people will equate appreciative inquiry with being positive. And then people who need to deal with tough situations like Jackie just described, or they want to make sure the problem gets solved, feel like that can't come up if you have to be positive. And I think it's why appreciative inquiry, it's really about being generative and having conversations that add value or value what's present. And so conversations around very tough issues, conversations around even things where you have to say no to somebody about something can be done in a way where both people are feeling connected and meaningful and moving forward together, even if it's not in the same direction.
That's a great point. Is it's the generativity is deeper understanding of a situation you're in. What do you wish to happen, and how do you increase possibilities and movement forward?
Yeah.
Jackie and Cheri, it occurred to me that there may be some folks on the call who aren't clear on what you mean by generative. Could you maybe give some insight into that, or give us some examples of generative questions?
Sure. Generativity, just if you think about, instead of generative questions, think questions that generate something. So they might generate connection, generate possibility, generate new knowledge, generate awareness around assumptions or beliefs. They might generate differences in perspectives, those kinds of things. So it's the idea of surfacing things that you don't know about, asking questions that you don't have answers to.
Great, thank you so much. So Jackie and Cheri, we will be back with you toward the end of the hour, and look forward to the synergies between your perspective and Julie's as we answer together the questions that come in from our attendees.
Wonderful,
So
thank you.
we'll see you soon. So welcome again, Julie. And I'm so excited to talk with you a little bit about the concepts from your book, Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. And I'd invite you to unmute your microphone if you would.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. So to make this transition, Julie, help us catch up. How does career development, which is your specialty, especially in this book, how does this fit into our conversation about conversations?
Yes, and what a great question. Because from my perspective, career development really boils down to conversation. It really is all about conversation. So frequently, I think managers and leaders equate career development with the processes and the paperwork and the systems and the forms and the programs, all of which are important. I know that 21% of HR and learning and development folks work hard to put those systems in place, and they're important for the organization. But when you think about how you grow, how we learn, how we develop, it's not through those administrative sorts of things. It's much more about the human connection. And so career development from our perspective is really all about the relationship and the conversation, the powerful conversations that leaders and managers have.
So Julie, I'm hearing from some of our attendees that we're having some audio issues. Did you have a headset before? Could we try that again? I apologize for the inconvenience.
No worries. I apologize to the people who are having to listen to the nonsense. Hold on a second.
Thanks to those who are alerting us to some issues, and appreciate your patience. Yes, Julie, are we good?
You tell me.
We are better. Way to go. Okay. So what would be some of the biggest or most common conversation mistakes or missteps that leaders make when it comes to talking to people about their careers?
Oh, gosh. Probably the biggest one is just not doing it. When Beverly Kay, my co-author, and I wrote the book, we did some research to kind of get to the bottom of what was getting in the way of managers and supervisors having these kinds of powerful conversations with their folks. And frequently, we found that folks were just reticent to do it for any number of reasons. They felt like they didn't have the time. They felt like they couldn't give people what they wanted. They were maybe afraid to develop folks for fear that they might move on to another role. And so there's a lot of stepping back away from these conversations. So I guess, that's the first thing, is just not doing it. Another thing has to do with sort of taking too much responsibility for the career development and the career conversation. I think a lot of time managers feel like it's their job to get people across the career finish line, and that's a pretty heavy burden on top of everything else. And so, it's not that leaders don't have a role in this, they absolutely do, but employees need to own their career development. And then as leaders, we can support and guide and nourish and network with them, but we need to shift from the thought that somehow employees are going to be passive consumers of career development services and the managers are doing the hard work, and instead let the employees own it, and let leaders play a different role in all of that.
So I wonder, as leaders are able to let the employees own that, if some of the pressure associated with having the conversations will dissipate. Have you found that to be true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Once leaders realize that their role is to frame the questions, to ask the questions, to keep an open channel for dialogue, and that the answers are really up to the employees, it's really liberating. And it helps people do, you know, leaders don't go into that role. Managers don't step up to management for all of the administrative, the budgeting, all of that. It's because they want to help people develop and grow and work with people. So once they can recast what development looks like in terms of asking the questions, suddenly they get to do what they stepped up to leadership to do in the first place. And it becomes a much more joyful activity.
So give us a glimpse of that joyful activity. What are the key ingredients in a great career conversation, Julie?
Well, it's all based, you know, and this sort of relates back to what Jackie and Cheri were talking about. It's all based on great questions, really good, juicy, insightful, thought-provoking questions that cause the employee to really kind of hit the pause button, to scratch their heads and think differently about themselves, who they are, where they've been, what they're good at, what they want to be doing, but also more broadly to really look at what's the environment within which my career needs to operate and be successful so that we can get to some good ways forward. So juicy questions are a biggie. And as I kind of mentioned just a minute ago, not just that internal focus on me, and who I am and what I'm all about, what I'm good at, what I want to do. That's important. But also the outward focus on what's going on in the business. What are the needs of the business? What's going on economically, politically, in terms of demographics, environmentally, that could have an effect on my career so that I can be planful and make sure that I'm moving myself in a direction that's going to be viable and allow me to thrive in the future.
So can we circle back to that idea of juicy questions, Julie? I would love to hear, you know, a few of your favorite, you know, conversations that can really add for a leader in their interacting with those they supervise.
Oh, you bet. Well, and maybe I want to start from even the other side of it, because I'm all about questions. I generally say, you know, almost any question is a good question, but there's one question that actually I'm on a bit of a mission to just eradicate from the workplace. And unfortunately, it's the go-to question that all managers tend to just default to when they get into a career conversation. And the question goes, where do you see yourself in 3 or 5 or 7 years, right? We've all heard that. And the problem with it is a question like that really sets the definition for career development to focus on positions. You know, I want to be the vice president of this. I want to be the senior manager of that. And it reinforces sort of that dynamic that we're trained for from the time we're kids. What do you want to be when you grow up? You know, a doctor, a lawyer. I wanted to be an elevator operator. So we get into
Really?
Yeah, that's a whole other webcast. But we get into all this B thinking. Employees come to the workplace with a B mindset, and then we reinforce a B mindset in our conversations with them. When the truth is, managers can't guarantee promotions. You know, organizations are leaner. Middle levels of management have been sort of delayered. And, you know, even if I'm thinking I want to be like an elevator operator, by the time I'm prepared to do that, maybe we don't need elevator operators anymore. So the being focus is what I'd like to get rid of. So the kind of juicy questions that frame a very different conversations are questions that get into, what do you want to do? You know, what kind of work do you want to be doing? What kinds of clients do you want to be working with? What kinds of problems do you want to solve? What kinds of new technologies do you want to be working with? Those kinds of questions reframe the conversation away from positions and what somebody might want to be, which a manager might or might not be able to deliver on, to what they want to do. And the beauty is when we start talking about what people want to do, we can generally find ways to infuse those opportunities into the role they're currently in. So we don't have to think about career development as waiting for our next role. We can be developing right in place by inviting those new challenges and opportunities into the current role, which makes for a much more engaged, satisfied employee as well.
Seems like a very powerful shift to shift away from thinking about positions and think more about learning and roles.
Yeah, and thinking about what Jackie and Cheri were just talking about, I'm thinking that's our flip when it comes to career development, to move off of the being and into more of a space of doing when we talk to folks.
That's really powerful. And I know that your book, Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go, has a lot of powerful questions in it. So let's shift for a moment and talk about, so this book was initially released in 2012, and you're working on a new edition that's set to be released in January of 2019. Julie, could you share with our attendees who may or may not have been exposed to the initial edition about what's different and what you've maybe learned and you're adding and putting into the new edition?
Yeah, and thank you for asking. It's really fun to have an opportunity to go back and look at what we wrote back there and see how much of it continues to be valid today, but also to see where, as things have shifted, we have an opportunity to think even a little more differently about career development. So I guess the big, and I don't think this is a secret, but I'll tell it anyway. The big shift is we are changing the subtitle of the book. The original subtitle was Career Conversations Employees Want. And the new subtitle will be Career Conversations Employees Want and Organizations Need. And that really telegraphs a thematic shift in the new edition to the context, the real business criticality associated with career development. We know there's a distinct connection between career development and engagement and retention and just about everything that matters most to businesses. And so we're going to add in more of that kind of a flavor. We're also looking at how the employment landscape has changed in just 6 years. We are a gig economy today, and there are more contractors and consultants and part-timers. And as a result of that, I think leaders, organizations need to start looking differently at the workforce. There's a little bit of almost developmental discrimination going on. When we think about development, it's generally focused at those full-time balance sheet employees. But when nearly 50% of the workforce is a different kind of employee, we're not doing ourselves any favors to withhold development from those folks. And so we're looking at expanding the audience for who leaders need to be engaging with in terms of career development. And then there are just two other things. One is from a content standpoint, we're adding a whole new chapter on culture. Because while we believe that an individual manager can make enormous strides in terms of the development of his or her staff, we also know that when the organization conspires in the form of culture, that creates an environment where development is just that much easier to make available to folks. And so we've got an assessment, we've got several hallmarks of a culture that supports career development. And then the last thing is a card deck. Our publisher, Barrett Kohler, asked us to create a card deck that would accompany the book. And so we've got a really cool deck with 50 or so questions and 8 or 10 different activities and games you can play with them to help build the career development conversation habit.
Wow, that seems like a lot of updates and changes and some really powerful ones in terms of awareness to the different types of people who might work in an organization and how to ensure that they're all the recipients of those career development conversations.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing that, Julie. And I know that I'm excited to see the next edition of the book. I'm going to take a quick moment and invite Cheri and Jackie back with us as panelists. And while I'm doing that, I want to also invite all of you who have been listening with us to feel free to use either the chat or the question panel to share your questions with us. And it looks like we're all back together, and Jackie, you may need to unmute. And I don't know, Jackie, if you got the message during the break, but we're having a little trouble with your audio from your headset. So hopefully we can have some better audio, and we invite all of you to share your questions, as I mentioned in the question panel. Now, before we began to talk to Julie, we were talking briefly about some generative questions, and Jackie let me know during the break that there's a list of generative questions in the book Conversations Worth Having. Jackie, did you want to say more about that while we're waiting for some questions to come in from our attendees?
No.
We can't hear you at all. Cheri, do you have anything to share there?
Sure. There is, in the book is when we talk about generative questions, we also provide a list of, fairly long list of generative questions that people can use in a variety of different situations. We also include there's a tool we use to help people learn to flip their conversations from the problem negative focus to an outcome focus as well.
Super, thanks so much, Cheri. Jackie, what I'm gonna invite you to do is try without the headset and see if we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, I took off the headset.
Wonderful. Okay, so again, I want to welcome any questions that you all might have in the question panel or in the chat. And I'm curious, the three of you have had a chance to get to know each other. You're all published by the same publisher. And Julie, you made some references to the synergies in the two messages. Jackie and Cheri, listening to Julie, what's emerging for you as a similarity or a way these two titles complement one another?
I wrote down, actually I was taking notes while Julie was talking, that juicy questions are generative questions, and that from being to doing, that appreciative inquiry is a way of knowing, being, and doing. So the synergy of questions to ask is what's very good, and the type of questions should be life-giving. If you think about it, we live in the worlds our conversations create, and that's a nice crossover.
Yeah.
So, Julie, I'm wondering if you would have any advice for that leader or manager who's really nervous to start having those conversations, you know, maybe is unsure of what question to start with, or is afraid of what the answer might be. Would you have any coaching for that leader who wants to begin to start to have some powerful conversations in the workplace?
Oh, absolutely. And in the book, we talk about the fact that we can take the edge off this whole thing around career conversations by not expecting that one conversation a year is the way to do it. You know, if that's what people are planning for, no wonder they're nervous. I would be too. If we can sprinkle conversation throughout the year, these generative conversations throughout the year, getting to know people, even in 5 or 10 minute blocks, we have a layered learning about them and a much deeper understanding. So, you know, a 5-minute conversation could be, tell me what you're loving about the work that you're doing right now. Or, you know, what would you like to be doing more of in the coming months? Or taking it all out of the personal and moving into the business landscape. What's going on in our business that you think is an area that you could contribute to in a different way? So, you know, and like I said, you could have a 3 or 5 minute conversation about that, and that's a career conversation. I guess it also strikes me when Jackie and Cheri were talking, we were talking about conversations about what's possible. And that's really what career development conversations are about. You know, it's what's possible. What are you interested in? What's out there? How can you bring your interests and aspirations in alignment with the business to explore possibilities and opportunities and ways forward?
That's really very helpful. So I have a question from Jeff, and I think that probably all of you could contribute, although this seems like a career conversation question. Julie, you mentioned that this can't be a once-a-year conversation. It's not an annual review, and we sit down and there's a lot of pressure on that meeting. So Jeff is wondering, what feedback would you provide in the way of documenting the conversations that happen routinely? So knowing that they should be happening each week or each month, not just when you're in a review. What advice for HR leaders or other leaders would you have about documenting those questions and conversations?
That's a great question, Jeff, because if you're going to have the conversations, you need to mine them for information and hang on to that. You don't want it to be Groundhog Day and have the same conversation over and over again. So what I typically suggest is that folks identify whatever the easiest note-taking format is, whether it's, on their phone or just a sheet of paper in a folder, depending upon your preferences, and literally just jot down a few words after you've spoken with folks, enough to jog your memory so that you can build upon that the next time you speak with them, and so that you can then let folks know that you're listening, because that's the other thing. What's that quote about if employees feel like they're dropping pennies down a well and they never hear a splash, they're going to stop dropping them? We need to splash a little bit. And so being able to glance at those notes and say, hey, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the fact that you were really interested in exploring a little bit more of this line of business. Is that still something? Lets folks know that you're listening. And it also builds that rapport. So much of it is about rapport and trust with the leader anyway.
So being able to listen and take enough notes to remember and circle back to the conversations that you've had.
Right, but not making it a big, huge, heavy documentation, fill in the forms. I mean, that's kind of a barrier to even having the conversation. If I know I've got to do 3 pages of debriefs, then it's like, there are too many other things to do. So really, literally a few keywords that'll keep it going. And the side benefit is when you have that annual conversation, if you've done that all year long, pulling that together is a piece of cake.
Sure. So Jeff has a quick follow-up question, Julie, but I'm going to let Cheri comment first.
I was going to ask Julie whether or not in those kinds of conversations, do you feel like it's ever appropriate to add in how measurable results or metrics for something if somebody is looking at, here's what I'd really like to do, as a way to help them measure progress and be able to flip back to it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think once you have a plan together, once you've figured out what someone wants to do and how they're going to move forward, then having milestones and that sort of thing really helps them track their progress. And we know how motivating just feeling progress is.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So Jeff was wondering if a good follow-up would be to email back whatever you retained so that you can get buy-in and confirmation from your employee.
Sure. Could do that. The only thing I would say, Jeff, is if you're making this a real ongoing dialogue where this is happening in the workflow day in and day out, where you're literally just, asking a question, getting an answer, layering this all together, it might feel more procedural to try to do that. And it might break the flow of just the natural ongoing relationship and conversation. So maybe you pick some key points in time, or when you've really got a big nugget that you want to make sure you lock down, and use those as opportunities to confirm.
Thanks, Julie. So I want to, just on the appreciative inquiry front, someone shared a really interesting quote in the chat that others might want to hear. Larry Cooperwriter's quote, "We walk in the world of the questions we ask." So in talking about powerful conversations, it sounds like the consensus here is that the powerful questions are really what fuel the powerful conversations worth having. I don't know, Jackie and Cheri, if you have any comments on that.
Yes, I mean, I think it goes back to what we said at the very beginning, is that the conversations we have, what we ask questions about and how we engage with each other, it creates our social reality. And the more I have really embodied that notion, I knew it intellectually for years, but writing this book and working with it with people, it's becoming more and more sort of embedded in my whole awareness that it's all conversation. And so being really intentional and knowing that the impact we want to have is the impact we're having in the world is huge.
Jackie, anything from you?
Yeah, I just, to point out what, following up what Julie and Cheri said, is conversations are defining moments in our lives and others. And I mean, think how much time people spend in their careers, and conversations shape you and they shape others. And the quote by David Cooperrider, he actually did the introduction to our book, which started out as the foreword, but he so got the book, and it was so long, and we didn't want to cut anything out. But he talks about D. Haka Visa Corporation, in that as a CEO, the legacy conversations, and that strategic planning is important in an organization, but in their organizations, the word conversation is used more than the word strategic planning, as an example. And we all know what Visa is, most of us.
Yes, indeed.
And Becky,
yes.
Becky, can I just add, because the questions are absolutely the cornerstone. But I think the other thing is we need to add in the spirit of curiosity. Because it's one thing to ask great questions and have it just hit a brick wall. The asker has to really bring a genuine desire to understand and to learn and to help that other person unpack whatever. And when you have those two together, I mean, there's no stopping you.
Yeah, great point.
So I have another question for you, Julie, from Joe. He's mentioning the fact that you talked about the new chapter in the book about culture, and that culture is a current buzzword. So he's curious about the research on that that might have been done with the new book. And he says, what companies are you're looking at to build on this? Culture seems to be closely tied to long-term career development.
Yes, it does, Joe. Absolutely. And this is probably a longer conversation than we have time for right now. We've been field researching for the last 6 years with organizations, both globally and domestically, looking at the characteristics of the organizations where the kind of career development we've been talking about has flourished. And so I can give you more, detail. I can connect with you offline on that. But what we've done is to identify that there are some very common markers or hallmarks across the board. And you're right. And things like transparency are huge. One of the hallmarks is being blurry around boundaries. And that means the boundaries among and between groups and departments and divisions and that kind of thing that allow for more flexibility and opportunity for people to grow and morph into different roles. And so, so we've identified 5 that we actually feature in the book based upon these primarily for-profit corporate entities across the U.S. and abroad.
Wow, that's really helpful, Julie. I look forward to hearing what the others are. That blurriness seems like a critical factor.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious about whether there are certain cultures that make the practice of appreciative inquiry more possible. And I don't know if that's a relevant question, Cheri and Jackie, but I'm wondering, are there organizations in our country that seem to be implementing appreciative inquiry, and what else might be true about those?
When I think of it's been used across all sectors, all sizes, from an entrepreneur, social innovation, Google's using it, Facebook, some of the Apple, the real innovative. So those are the organizations I know of in education. Where I think it could be used more is in our government. That's, which way do you come into the government? There was a big report on CNN that if you're watching all the news out there, it's quite stressful. So how do we bring in these conversations more to our governments at any level?
Yes. Cheri,
and just to respond around what kinds of organizations are using appreciative inquiry, it requires leadership or management that is really open to engaging the whole. That leaders who recognize and kind of step up and say, I don't have all the answers, or managers who say, I don't have all the answers, and it's going to take all of us to solve the complex problems in the world. So we need to be in conversation and get diverse perspectives and a multiplicity of ideas about how to move forward.
Sure. So here's a question that I think will span for all 3 of you. So I'd be open to hearing what you each have to say. The person asking the question is wondering if the 3 of you have found that conversations are encouraged and prioritized in the workplace as you've traveled. The writer says that he's found them as something that a lot of leaders and managers don't prioritize, and the conversations get bumped for more important activities in the workplace. So curious what the three of you have seen as you've worked with organizations as it relates to the priority of having conversations.
My experience is that conversations get bumped because we don't have time to talk. So we don't have time to have the important conversation or to bring everybody together to have the important conversation because there's too much to do and we can't drop that. And in reality, those organizations that take the time to have the conversations end up saving a lot of time down the road.
Yeah, I would also add there's two things is if I say to you, Becky, hi, I move right on by. But if I say, how are you? I need to stop and listen to how you are, and you should reciprocate and ask me how I am. So it's taking the time to breathe and stop and have these conversations because we know they're a critical part of how things get done. And I will tell people that sometimes when you're in a really engaging email that seems to get heated up, sometimes you need to say, let's take this conversation offline and talk. Instead of texting, pick up the phone. It's quicker. So to be more mindful about how do you engage in conversations that are productive and meaningful.
And when it comes to career conversations, they definitely are the ones that tend to get bumped. When we did our research, we heard that 3-to-1 time was the major reason managers gave for not doing career development. And yet, if we can rethink how to deploy those conversations, again, in these smaller envelopes, if we can think about embedding them into an interaction you're already having with the employee. And, for instance, if you're going to compliment someone, you can say thank you, or you can say thank you. And what was it about that project that made you go above and beyond? Or what did you love so much that you just couldn't stop going until it was so perfect? You can take those moments that already are going to happen and bump them up from a quality standpoint. And then time, once we help people understand that, then time is not the barrier any longer. It's just in the workflow. You're growing with the flow.
Sure, that's really helpful. Well, as someone who leads people myself, I'm just feeling a little guilty for all the times I canceled those kinds of conversations because I felt too busy. So I know that it's a common thing. It seems that we may have reached the end of our questions. So if there are any additional questions from attendees, we would love to see them. And absent that, I would invite each of you to maybe share just one kind of key takeaway or something that you're thinking of as we wrap up our time together. And then I have some other information that's really vital to share with our attendees today. So let's see, Jackie, I invite you first.
Okay, so I would say when you think of the next time you think of the word powerful conversations or conversations worth having, and stop and think that if you want to build productivity or deepen relationships, trust or enrich relationships, think about the tone and direction of your conversation because it makes all the difference in your life and the life of others. Going back to a famous quote by Cooperwriter, we live in the worlds our conversations create, so make sure they're healthy ones, no matter how difficult the situation.
Thanks so much, Jackie. And Cheri, what would you like to share as we close?
I think if you haven't been using Appreciative Inquiry, or if generative questions are not part of the way you ordinarily engage in conversations, I would encourage you to start getting curious. First, curious about where are you? What's going on for yourself when you're in conversations? Are you kind of downloading and preparing to talk, or are you listening carefully? And then to just get curious about other people. We so often jump to conclusions and make assumptions and make up stories about what somebody else is saying, and decide to check those out, to ask about your assumptions, and you'll be surprised at how often there's either more than you were aware of, or your assumption or the story you're making up is completely off base. And suddenly you'll start really connecting with people in very different ways.
Great. And Julie, would you like to share?
Well, yes, first I want to thank you, Becky and Cheri and Jackie, for this generative conversation. This has been great. And there are some really wonderful thoughts on the chat pod from some of our participants that sum things up nicely as well. I guess I'd like to build on what Jackie and Cheri have said, that life and also conversations are built or life and careers are built one conversation at a time over time. And so making the decision, the commitment to even ask that one question is a significant step forward and changes the lives of the people that you lead. So finding the time to do that is key. And there's a real business case for doing it too. It's no longer a nice to do in today's tight employment environment. It's really a need to do. And so, so making that commitment is good for your people, it's good for you, and it's good for your business.
That's really powerful, Julie. I appreciate that so much. So we want to take a quick moment to let you know about some next steps. So if you would like to stay in touch with Jackie and Cheri, we encourage you to go today and buy their new book, Conversations Worth Having, on Amazon, and then visit their website, conversationsworthhaving.today, and you'll see a subscribe form like the one that we've put up on the screen, and you can enter your email address, and then you can find out more, stay up to date with their latest thinking, and find out about events they might be having, and continue to learn from the two of them. If you want to stay connected with Julie, one possibility is to go online and pre-order the new edition of Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go on Amazon, and we will direct you to that link in our follow-up email. And we'd also invite you, if you want to get started reading the book faster, you can preview the first 2 chapters of the first edition by visiting Julie's website, juliewinklegiulioni.com. And what you're going to see is this headline that says preview the book. And when you enter your email address and subscribe to Julie's updates, you will receive an automatic email that includes those first 2 chapters for you to begin to learn from. So this has been an amazingly powerful conversation with 3 amazing women that I'm thrilled to be able to learn from. And we thank you so much for your interest and participation today.
Thank you
so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.